Welcome to Macquarie Business School. This is the Global MBA curriculum series. My name is Lan Snell, and it's a very warm welcome to join us broadcasting live from Sydney, Australia. This session is being recorded, so those who are not able to join us can pick up the recording at their convenience. I've got a very special guest this afternoon. It's a colleague of mine. Abas and I have got a long working relationship. In fact, we met, I don't know, how long ago did we meet, Abas?
2012, 2013, yeah.
Yeah, a while ago, right? So, you know, this was, for me, 2 business schools before I joined Macquarie, and it was at a conference. And it was this one conference that it's an annual marketing academic conference. And I think this was in New Zealand that I met Abas, and I hadn't met Abas before. And we're standing in, you know, just listening to the speeches. We noticed that each of us were presenting a paper, and I went into Abas's presentation. Bearing in mind, I've never met Abas before, and I was literally blown away by his presentation. He won the best paper award that year for his research. Remind me again, it was on branding, obviously, that's your area.
Yes, yeah, that paper was, by the way, you also won the best paper award, I believe, in that year, right? Yeah. So yeah, that paper was on brand health index, introducing or proposing a new measure to track the health of a brand in terms of financial or market performance over time.
And it's a quantifiable measure of brand equity, I suppose, over time. So it was an excellent presentation, and literally we're all blown away by Abas's research. And fast forward now, here we are again. We're colleagues working at Macquarie Business School, and it's really a privilege to work with a researcher such as Abas's caliber on this. So at this point in time, I might ask Abas to introduce himself to you.
So yes, hi Lan, hi everyone. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks for joining us in this session. I am Abas. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Marketing at Macquarie Business School. My main research area is branding. I started with measuring brand performance. Then I moved into strategies to improve performance. And over the past few years, I became interested in this topic of woke marketing and brand activism, which we have seen recently. Brands are kind of also showing interest. And yeah, so I wrote a paper on this topic a year ago, published in The Conversation, which was received very well, but beyond my expectations at least. Around 50,000 reads, and then we had follow-up interviews and media interest on this topic. And the key highlight was the recent Black Lives Matter, the second movement. Actually, it started in 2014-15.
Yeah, well, you certainly tapped into a vein that is very much dear to, to most people globally, and that's quite evident in how strongly people feel about these movements. And indeed, that is the conversation for our discussion this afternoon. Before we go into the discussion, I know that we've asked you to fill out a poll, if you wouldn't mind, just like for us to understand where the audience is coming from. We know that we've received over 500 people registered for this event globally, and so it really helps us to understand which area you're coming in from, if you wouldn't mind addressing that poll. Here's how it's going to work this afternoon. We encourage you to be as interactive as possible. So Abas and I will regularly have a look at the chats that are coming in. If you could please post your questions via that chat facility, and we'll come back to you as best as we can. So please make it as interactive as possible. Stop us. And if you would like to make a comment or a question at any point in time, we'd love to hear from you. Let me go on and share my screen right now with you. Okay. So becoming a meaning maker, brand activism and the search for meaning. That is the topic for today's conversation. We've done our introductions. Abas has given you a bit of an overview on the sort of the pickup from the mainstream media about his area and his commentary in this space, and it has been quite phenomenal in terms of the level of engagement from the community about this. So that's just some examples of the pickup. This unit is part of what we call the Global MBA, which is a digital online MBA program that Macquarie Business School offers. This is this unit belongs to, which specialisation is it again, Abas? It's the influencing specialisation. And so Become a Meaning Maker is particularly topical as organisations and individuals, I guess, search for meaning in these very uncertain times. The unit itself has, is hugely popular. It's attracted over 18,000 visitors to the open site, the open unit, close to 7,000 enrolments. And to date, we partner with Coursera as our platform. It is a global platform. It is a US-based platform, and it is one of them, in fact, the world's leading platform. And they partner with, Coursera partners with over 200 universities globally, to the likes of Yale, Columbia, Harvard, all those sort of big sort of names, including ourselves. And at this point, I'm proud to say that we're the university with the highest rating at 4.9 out of 5 stars. So we're doing something right with the learning community out there. I'm pleased to say that the Global MBA model is fairly stackable. And so that consists of both open units on Coursera, that is open, it's a distributed model of education, and also the closed, meaning the degree students. What we're talking about today in conversation is this unit, Become a Meaning Maker. What is it? How do we manifest this meaning? Why are organizations, falling over each other in order to come up with a stake in the ground as to where they stand on some of these social matters? This discussion is going to be grouped, I guess, in 3 main areas. The first one is what we call to appease or appeal. We're being deliberately controversial in how we're framing this discussion to get some engagement and some commentary from you, the audience, on where you stand on this matter. It is quite easy for us to sit on the sidelines and observe how organizations are behaving. And we quite rightly, as consumers, expect a lot of our organizations. We expect them to sort of put a stand in the ground, but also be authentic with it and not be, opportunistic in pursuing that position, I guess. So that's the first one, to appease or to appeal. The second one we're going to be looking at areas is from reacting to creating meaning. And then finally, we're going to explore some of the spillover effects. So they're the 3 areas that we'll be entertaining with you this afternoon. Before I go any further, I'm wondering how we're going with the polling situation here at the moment. I can't see any polls. I might just close that for now and progress. Okay, so to appease or to appeal, and indeed, what do we mean by this? Abas, what is this framework that we've got in front of us?
Yes, this just summarizes the progress of branding over years in terms of developing relationship with consumers and target audience, either existing or potential target audience. So back in the day, the key focus was always on adding more features to our products and services and just focusing mostly on quality of our offerings without being involved or engaged in social issues or political issues or values, perhaps social values. But then brands started realizing that purely focusing on functions is not going to be very engaging, or is not going to be helping them with developing social bond and staying relevant to their target audience. So they started adopting emotions, and then they moved from emotion to signature stories, still with emotion. But then they realized we are becoming a bit boring. We are selling yogurt, but what are those higher purpose values? What is our contribution to the society besides adding more flavors to our yogurts and to our products, right? Then brands started adopting higher values, higher purpose values, such as empowering their target audience, We have examples of Dove and Chobani, great brands in terms of focusing on purpose beyond those functional benefits, which is kind of a slow cooked, like a patient, long-term strategy in terms of becoming appealing and staying relevant to your target audience. But recently, brands naturally risk averse. They have moved into strategies quite controversial. The risk is that they most likely experience backlash because they are touching on those high social those social tension areas or political tension areas. But the benefit perhaps for them is perhaps the question for us today, the motivation. One key motivation obviously is to get the attention of the target audience. So more people will talk about my brand. So we're compared to purpose, wokeness, and activism seems to be a short-term, impatient, fast kind of strategy towards signaling to your target audience that you care for the society and you are here beyond profit.
So another way to look at this slide, and then sort of, I guess, the movement here is that no longer can organizations be Switzerland, right? No longer can we be neutral in. So in fact, society has had, we know that consumers over a period of time have become a lot more discerning, a lot more demanding, and a lot more active in our voice for this, in our cry. And so our expectations have also shifted. And so therefore that has also added a bit of a pressure in terms of influencing how organizations or brands respond in response to consumer expectations, right? I note that Miriam has posted a question as in woke, as in meaning progressive. I think that's what we mean by we're talking about the term woke here, is that we are enlightened with the current situation and topical, and are progressive and pushing for that change. Would that be how you would conceptualize the term woke?
Yes, put simply, woke means you are awake to discrimination. That's really the simple definition of being woke, is that you won't be able to stay neutral and not responding to social or political discrimination. And you, as a brand, you are expected more and more these days to show that you care and you are prepared to walk into this controversial area, and you are prepared to sacrifice. So what is that sacrifice? Simply that can be financial sacrifice. So if you are a woke brand, you will be looking for high tension areas in the society to trigger the discussion in the society about issues even irrelevant to your core business, what you are selling. So for example, Apple is focusing on pushing for LGBTQ plus rights, so not quite related to what they are selling actually. But yeah, so that's the definition of wokeness.
So why is it that organisations should be expected to take an active stance on this when indeed that is not their core business? Why should they be political about where they stand in any of these sort of movements? Is that not controversial? Is that not risky?
It is quite risky. It is quite controversial. But as you perfectly mentioned, they are expected by their target audience to take a stand and to show their responsibility and commitment towards solving or fighting towards solving those social issues. And it can be a lose-lose situation, or it can be a win-win situation. These days, if brands stay neutral and don't really take a stand, not symbolically, that's one way they have done. They have posted those black squares on their Insta, which has still generated backlash. But if they don't show commitment, there will be backlash. And the main reason is that consumers can see that how powerful are these brands. they see brands as agents of change. And they are involved in our daily lives. We support them by buying their products and services, and given their power in terms of financial support. So consumers expect them to also invest in those social discrimination areas. If they don't do it, there will be backlash. If they do it, depending on how they do it, execution, the power of overpowering message, and the choice of ambassador, all of these topics, whether they have any history or practice, they have been practicing or not, so they might see opportunistic. Perhaps we will be discussing this bit further. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, Miriam's asked for examples, and we'll be touching on those examples. And I think Sam has posted up this question about the long-term, the goal here. Is it just an opportunistic thing, or are we, are we expecting some sort of follow through in this? And we'll be touching on that. In fact, that is one of the themes that we'll be going back to all the way through this, and that is about the antecedents and the consequences and an authenticity and action to demonstrate your pledge to it. The other thing before we leave this slide here, Bas, is that we talk about brands as though they're almost people, but brands are not people. Brands are organizations. And so why do brands or organizations want to create this sort of persona, almost like it, to personify the brands? What is the strategy behind that?
So the main strategy is that brands have realized that target audience, their consumers, not all of them, but majority of them, they use the brand and the values associated with the brand to communicate in the society who they are. So if there is a gap between my actual personality and my desired personality, most likely I will cover that gap by, being associated with a brand that helps me to communicate a better version of myself, and that is helpful for brands to realize that in their journey towards developing relationship with their target audience, they need to adopt more values that the society actually values, right? And for that reason, they have started communicating a humanized version of themselves by sharing personalities similar to human personalities, by communicating names similar to human names, such as Amazon Alexa, for example, is an example for that. Or different characters with different names. So all of these they have done in the past to communicate a humanized version of themselves, informal and personal version. But now they are moving into adopting human-like behaviors. So from human-like mindset and human-like personality, now they are moving into human-like behavior, which is activism.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people feel comfortable with having a relationship with a brand. Yeah. But I guess a lot of people, there is a certain segment out there, if you have a look at sort of the commitment and the espouse, is that the people feel very devoted and committed and very loyal to the brands. And we've seen, a number of examples where a backflip has happened and people are very aggressive against that and take that to the street. Let's move on from this slide here onto the next slide, because this sort of extends the discussion somewhat. Abas, take us through this. I mean, you're talking about the humanness, the personification of brands. I guess this speaks to that.
Yeah, exactly. So the journey towards consumer brand relationship obviously starts with brands communicating human-like cues, and that cue can be tangible features. For example, a product line being replaced by a product family. That family communicates a human-like characteristic, right? Or the devices that we sell, we call them Alexa, person name, or the gendered voices that we have, for example, for Siri. These are all human-like, tangible features that we communicate. But we also have kind of abstract personality, like communications that most of us are familiar. So a brand is innocent, a brand is hero, a brand is caring, a brand is sincere, but different meanings, right? That we have done that in the past by direct and supporting branding strategies. We play with different logo colors and typeface, different characters, different taglines. These are all direct branding strategies to communicate a human version of ourselves as a brand. But then consumers already have their own values, and then they start comparing what they receive from the brand and what they already have. If there is overlap, if there is that connection between what a brand has communicated in their journey of meaning making with the existing values of consumers, then we receive a high score on that consumer brand congruity or self-brand connection, right? It can be an overlap or it can be a fulfilling a gap. Who are those brands that are like me, or they think like me, or they celebrate values that I value, right? And then if the score is high, then consumers start becoming loyal, fighting for the brand, and showing commitment, right? Brand attachment and brand aversion. If the score is low, then you will see, migration away from the brand to other brands. At the end of the day, we are looking for entities to develop relationship and to fill the gap in our personality.
And I guess, this would be predicated on presumably some very thorough research that the organisation has conducted to understand which persona, which segment that they should pursue. I mean, this is classic segmentation, targeting, and positioning kind of discussion when we're considering the end result here, and that is the persona of it, because presumably they wouldn't create a persona or pursue a particular stance unless that was representative of a segment that was commercially viable. So we get back to the question of as to, are they pursuing this out of good faith, in that they are really passionate about this, or are they pursuing this as a commercial opportunistic moment, or is it a combination of both?
That's a very important question, perhaps the most important question that I have been asking the past few years doing research on both marketing and branding was this: what are the motivations, and are they genuine in their moves towards activism? They can look at what they have done in the past. If they have any history of similar, strategies, or executing or launching, running campaigns with similar patterns, or sometimes time will tell whether they are genuine or not. But simply, if they haven't done it in the past, and all of a sudden overnight they are drifting towards wokeness and becoming social justice warrior, most likely they will be perceived as opportunistic. Because consumers are quite smart. They look at the previous ad campaigns that they have done. They look at the website, the mission statement, board of director members. For example, if a brand like Starbucks is pushing a campaign named Race Together, which was the case in 2015, they, at Starbucks, they were expecting that everyone would fall in love with them because they are, doing something beyond selling, Nespresso and Frappuccino. But what happened? Consumers questioned the motivation, and they jumped on their website. They realized out of 20 members of board of directors, 19 are, belonging to one race. So how come you are, advocating for something that you're not practicing? That's a super crucial question, whether they are practicing or not. If not, whether they are prepared to invest for future.
In the Starbucks example, I mean, they'd be forgiven because that would describe and be the composition of most boards, fairly homogenous in one area. What I'm hearing you say from this, I guess, to take out a message from this slide is that past behaviour of a brand is a really good predictor for future intentions here, right? And that remains the case with human beings as well. And so when there is a sudden departure from that or uncharacteristic, well, then we will question the authenticity and how genuine it is. But if there's a track record, there is what we're talking about.
100%. But still, we should welcome if there is no history in the past, but really overnight, a brand like Amazon has, realized, wow, they should do something, right? We should still welcome, but it also depends on the level of commitment going forward, whether they just put a statement that we are with you, express solidarity, and that's it, or they do something with a greater impact for the community.
Mm-hmm. And so this slide, I mean, really talks about it almost in a dichotomous way, and at this point, rather than being a neutral, rather than being Switzerland, we're trying to form two things, either attachment, that is a deeper sense of commitment and relationship, or divorce, departure, aversion.
That's right. That's right. Depending on what we have done in the past, depending on our current marketing and branding communications, we always hope that we increase the brand attachment, consumer brand attachment. But there are obviously, cases that we see consumers have been with the brand for more than 2 decades. Now they are migrating from left to right, from attachment to aversion. And we are seeing consumers quite indifferent. They couldn't care less about, what brands they are buying. As long as, for example, it does the job, right? But now they see, wow, this brand is tapping into these higher purpose values. So it is important for me. Therefore, I am moving from indifference to attachment. And this framework here, while simple cut, it explains that based on our strategies, based on our movements and decisions, consumers really move from left to right. On that attachment aversion.
So I'm just looking at some of the comments that are coming in. Mary's posted a very interesting comment, I guess, and this is about the role of influencers either being tapped on the shoulder by the organisation, the corporation, to amplify or be brand ambassadors. I think celebrity endorsements. Or individuals on their own seeing that they're attached to a particular brand and then of their own accord promote that brand because they've got a certain attachment and they want to amplify. So both push and pull sort of things in play there. And I guess whichever way you look at it, it's still an amplification of those brand values, right? So there's an attachment formed either way. What are your thoughts?
100%. What we are also seeing with this attachment aversion is, for example, with Gillette's campaign, The Best Men Can Be, we see a massive number of indifference consumers now falling in love with the brand. And they are creating this backlash to the backlash phenomenon, right? So initially, perhaps, some consumers reacted negatively, but there were consumers who couldn't care less, but then they realized we have to support these values. And well done to, for example, Gillette that has done this, right? And we need to support. So you would see so many comments around what is wrong with this campaign. I don't understand why you are offended, why you are upset. So these comments were quite frequent out of those 46,000 comments posted on Gillette's Facebook. That shows if you celebrate those values, you can tap into other market in different category, and you might also see consumers moving from avoidance to attachment. But the risk always is that you are alienating your existing customers. And there are strategies for avoiding this as much as you can.
Another cynical way to sort of observe all this sort of potential behaviour is that organisations orchestrate deliberately engineer these sort of deliberately controversial moments to get that level of engagement, so that people are speaking about their brand and are defending it on behalf of the organization almost. So this is enacting that social justice keyboard warrior sort of behavior out there, to what you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. At the end of the day, one of the short-term motivations for brands in doing this is, to stay relevant, but also to generate conversation. Some of them even believe that, being noticed is worth it, even if it is negative sentiment overall. But still we get the attention. How consistent they are and how much commitment they can show going forward, that kind of tells us whether they were genuine in their moves or whether they just wanted to get the free PR, because they are moving beyond personality and those feature-based cues, and they are adopting those high purpose social tensions, like movements such as Me Too or Black Lives Matter. They inject those movements into their campaigns to show that they are kind of woke to discrimination. And those topics are obviously, has got the social currency element that we will be discussing in a second.
They've got a social currency for sure, but they also strike a chord because, it's been a fairly long-term movement. And I guess it's all the right ingredients that are happening right now to sort of awaken that global consciousness about universal laws, about universal truths, right? And it really does question where you stand. Look, one of the questions that are coming in from Julio, hi Julio, is what are the key things that are making people more averse or attached to brands? Is there common denominators? That's an interesting, is it a certain type of person? So, is it a personality trait? Can we say that people who are, more extroverted have more likelihood to form stronger attachments to brands than, people who are introverted, for example?
Yes, I agree. That's a very interesting question that perhaps requires full attention in terms of doing a proper research, looking at the core personalities. But the second level of human personalities or ideologies, in general, if you have a progressive value, if you are pushing for a progressive value, you are appealing to target audience with progressive values. If you are pushing for conservative values, then you are appealing to that type of, consumers. So whether I am extroverted or not, to what extent that affects the acceptance or the perception, that's a very important question. But currently, not much research has been done. Openness seems to be related to that progressive values, but besides the personalities, the core personalities, and besides the second level personalities, such as being creative and innovative and caring and friendly, how you do it and how you communicate, and whether you have done it in the past or your choice of support plays a more important short-term role here. You know what I mean?
I imagine, if we imagine, so the bell curve, and we consider the early adopter group category there, and if the majority is, let's call it, this is a nice little slide to explain this, indifferent, neutral, don't really care. We consider that is majority in the population, and the outliers on either side are either going to be those a bit more attached and progressive, or those who are are not. We can see that could be an indication of, just addressing Julio's point, in early adopter behavior of brand attachment or not, and be a bit more vocal about it. Let's move on from this slide, Abas. And so we've just talked about, we spent a bit of time talking about the appeasement, or, to appease or to appeal. And now we're going to move on from reacting to creating actual meaning. And let's understand and unpack how we do this a bit more. Take us through this brand activism framework.
Sure. So somewhat we kind of address some key areas of activism, such as motivation. But overall, when we study motivation, when we study brand activism and woke branding, there are 4 key categories that we should look at. What are the motivations for brand activism? Yes, they want to stay relevant, but whether they are those motivations are profit-seeking, or whether they are pro-social, there are pro-social motivations. In terms of the characteristics of activism, we need to have a clear understanding of what is an activist kind of move, what is a woke move versus other types of branding strategies, and then what are the key elements that helps the gives a higher likelihood of acceptance for these campaigns. So authenticity, for example, and other factors that we have slide to discuss. How we can facilitate and reduce the risk of experiencing backlash, especially if you have genuine motivations. And then what is this final outcome of brand activism, and whether it is worth it or not, and then we have 2 key, obviously, consequences, ultimate consequences: boycotting or boycotting. Whether we boycott the brand and move to other brands, whether we switch to other brands, or whether we stick to other brands, or whether we support the brand. We are existing customer, but we will continue buying from this brand, or we belong to another brand, we buy from other brands, now we are switching to this brand, so we are supporting. So boycott or boycott are the ultimate consequences. With the motivations, perhaps if we can move, if there are no questions, we can move into the next slide, which is, I guess, motivation.
Yeah, but before we do, I've got a question.
Please, yeah.
So, under what circumstances would each of these 4 dimensions serve to help us understand where it's wrong or right? So, for example, if we have a look, I just wanted to unpack it with some real life examples here. So if we consider the motivations of Facebook, I mean, that's fairly controversial at the moment in terms of the Cambridge Analytica issue, and their sort of clouded judgments and stance on privacy issues. So what are their motivations in there? Because what those 2 consequences that you mentioned in terms of boycotting or boycotting, that's been observed right now. So we can see that there's, and we're touching into some spillover effects, I guess, but like other organizations are acting as a consequences because they've been voting with their judge. I'm going to boycott Facebook because we take a stance against that. Can you provide your comments about that?
So there are two questions. Are we boycotting Facebook as a brand, or as a consumer, or as a user? Because as we know, recently around 1,000 brands have joined this call for boycotting Facebook. Brands like Unilever or Coca-Cola, I believe Unilever also joined, but Coca-Cola for sure I know. So why other brands are boycotting Facebook, or versus why users are boycotting Facebook? So Facebook that's the problem with Facebook. Facebook has not done enough in terms of showing their responsibility in fighting against these issues. So they have been in the neutral category. or profit-seeking category, providing a platform, and then we're not responsible for the content, right? Because it might damage our profit and revenue, right? But why other brands are boycotting Facebook? Some of them, or obviously not all of them. We should also question the motivations of those brands boycotting Facebook. Some of them are to just show how important it is for them, even if it means sacrificing, short-term revenue by not advertising on Facebook. They want to signal to their target audience. It is all about signaling at the end of the day. But the question is whether that is a symbolic signaling or whether that is a costly signaling. So if it is a costly signaling, it means, for a brand like Coca-Cola, if they have a massive target audience on Facebook and they can advertise to generate more revenue, and giving up on that one, that means costly signaling. But if they don't have much of revenue attached to Facebook advertising, then that is not really costly or sacrifice. There is no sacrifice in that, right? So at the end of the day, there are two approaches: brands taking a stand, but we question their motivations and they see backlash. Some brands like Facebook, they haven't taken any stand and they haven't shown any responsibility, and they're also experiencing backlash. So that is kind of, when I said lose-lose or win-win, that's pretty much when you don't take a stand or versus when you take a stand.
Yeah, so you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? But what we said earlier about consumers, we've changed. Society has changed. And so our expectations are much more. We expect brands such as global brands to take a more active stance. That by them being Switzerland and them being neutral is not good enough, and that is a backlash in itself. The question becomes, how can you not take a stance to such an important movement?
Exactly, given the power that you have as a brand and
Right.
given your involvement in our lives on a daily basis.
Right. Let's move on to the next slide. Tell us what this slide, what we should take out of this slide.
So this slide just tries to highlight the importance of that brand purpose that we talked, the second phase after neutral brand purpose, then woke. So Chobani is a great example of a brand like a adopting a patient approach towards celebrating higher values, towards supporting higher values. And I haven't seen much of backlash against Chobani because they haven't added that social currency element to be seen as opportunistic. They have Chobani shares 10% of their organization's the brand value with the employees. Chobani's CEO is an asylum seeker, and he supports asylum seekers by giving them platforms such as Asylum Seeker Incubator, where they can, they invest in those asylum seeker ideas, right? And he gives speeches on anti-CEO and topics not related to the core business. So the core business, as we know, is that's a yogurt business. They could just focus on flavors, playing with prices, but they have gone all the way to higher purpose. But then from Chobani to brands like Pepsi or Starbucks or Gillette, we see brands are kind of quite impatient and they want fast attention from target audience. That's why they have realized that they should adopt social currency. They should inject social currency in their campaigns, which we will be talking perhaps in the next slide.
As I'm just having a look at this question coming in from Oliver, and he's saying that there is obviously a segment of recipients, customers or members of the public that see some of these woke signals and messages with a bit of cynicism, as we talked about earlier. So this questions the sincerity or simple opportunism of a marketing department. bandwagoning, as it is termed in some of the media that you've been contributing to, Abas. The question is, do you think this portion is significant enough to deter some brands from taking these stances? And first, and therefore, under what conditions do you think that they might be more or less likely to make such decisions as a result? And Oliver has made some suggestions in terms of perhaps industry, brand, or size maturity might be some of those attributes affecting those decision points. What are your thoughts?
Very interesting questions, very important questions. On the first question, let's be specific. Let's find a campaign. Let's talk about Gillette's The Best Men Can Be, where on their YouTube channel, more than 1 million comments were posted, and they were reported. They also deleted some of the comments, thousands of comments, right? That was one kind of accusation. But anyway, one of the frequent comments was, get woke, go broke. Get woke, go broke. And looking at the Gillette's value after that campaign, P&G had to write off 8 billion from the value of Gillette. So that tells us that that portion was significant for Gillette in terms of those feeling angry and cynical towards the motivations, right? Another evidence with Gillette's campaign that that was they changed their approach. It wasn't like Nike's Dream Crazy campaign, which was followed by Dream Crazier, to just show that, hey, we are in this, we are committed, we are not scared. What Gillette did was a backflip from toxic masculinity to something about firefighters. Totally different, but safe perhaps. How our products are good for firefighters' sensitive skin, you know what I mean? So yes, if you don't do the market analysis, market research right, if you don't execute your message properly, yes, then you might go broke, or you might lose more consumers, at least over short term.
Or you might alienate and disengage, a segment to which you didn't want to, because in taking a stance, you full well know, this is eyes wide open, right? You full well know, or you can anticipate, if you've done your good research on this, the reactions that the consumers, and so there is a certain segment that, that is not your target anyway. And so that backlash, or, that perhaps that noise that is created is really good engagement in terms of your brand recognition out there and amplification, be that controversial or not, it's still good engagement. But yet the core segment to which you are chasing, if you're appealing to that segment, well, then that is only going to strengthen that commitment and that relationship because you've espoused that. Yes. So I hope that addresses your comment and question there, Oliver. Thank you very much for posting that up. So what is this? What are we learning from this? You've got some stats to back up your assertions here in terms of backing.
Yes. So this slide just tells us that's the difference between adopting a purpose versus becoming woke. So in mid 2018 or late 2018, Gillette launched this Shaquem Griffin campaign, quite an inspiring campaign, featuring a football player born with one arm. And if you look at the online conversation, word of mouth, online word of mouth, the orange line, you see pretty much quite a flat conversation, not much conversation. But there was some conversation over dinner table, perhaps, but which is not evident. No one sees if you talk to your partner, right? Brands want kind of evident conversation, which is on social platforms. Then I believe they looked at what Nike did at the same time in mid 2018, featuring Colin Kaepernick, another football player, and they compared the two campaigns. That's my understanding. And they realized, wow, our campaign was a purpose-driven, and their campaign was purpose-driven, was woke, and they had this social currency element injected in their campaign. because that was about, Black Lives Matter movement. I can't breathe, right? Then, after almost less than like in few months, they realized we need to find a social movement that has got some degree of relevance to us, and they picked the Me Too movement, and then they launched their campaign mid-January 2019, which was on toxic masculinity. And then you look at the online conversation compared to the previous campaign. But yes, they got the conversation, but it was mostly negative, especially on YouTube. On Facebook, it was slightly mixed, and we saw this backlash to the backlash. We saw a move of supporters, but at the end of the day, because of lack of practice, because of the overpowering message, because of lack of inclusivity in their campaign, focusing only on one gender, that was the troubling bit about that campaign, which was resulted in massive backlash.
Unfortunate. Okay, I'm just also mindful of time. I do note that there's a couple other questions that we'll get into at the moment, but I just wanted you to finish off on this conversation about some of the statistics supporting this.
Yeah, so again, going back to, because this is quite a dynamic chat we have, we started with motivation, and this chart here again tells us perhaps a little bit about the motivations behind the Best Men Can Be campaign. On the left, you see Gillette's target audience, breakdown in terms of gender and age. On the right, you see online shaving conversation, gender and age breakdown. So Gillette's existing target audience, mostly men, 56% men, and mostly over 35 years old, 64% to be precise. On the other hand, they wanted to appeal to this target audience that generates the greatest conversation online. Majority of 75% less than 35 years old. And bang, that was the campaign that they launched to appeal to this group on the right, because they were losing target audience to the likes of Harry's and Dollar Shave Club, and they are still losing their consumers to, especially to Dollar Shave Club.
So these data-driven insights drove them to that formulation of that campaign. In this case, it worked out to be quite, beneficial for the brand. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Totally. So they thought we want to appeal to this target audience, and what this target audience wants from us. What are those values? These are the values. Is there any social movement that we can inject? Yes, there is. Me Too. And this group, it actually helped them by generating that backlash to the backlash. But whether they have turned into buyers is yet to be seen.
I really like that, the backlash to the backlash. All right, so before we move on to this sort of the antecedents and also the consequences, if there's antecedents, we must consider the consequences of it. Let me just turn to a couple of questions here in the 8 minutes that we have remaining or so. So from Cleo, are SME brands receiving the same amount of scrutiny from consumers as those big global brands? Are there any differences in the level of consumer expectations of brand activism across different areas of the world?
Very good question. Very good question. In this chart, you see one of the key antecedents and the drivers or the factors is impact. So that perhaps answers the question of the expectation from SMEs versus large brands. So Jeff Bezos today just became $13 billion richer just in one day. So the expectation from a brand, an organization like Amazon, is totally different to an SME perhaps that tries to just keep the head above the water, right? So that the expectation is tied to the power of the organization. If we see a brand is powerful and they have a massive customer base and they have a great reach across different regions, the expectation is that with just one campaign, you can educate the society or start this conversation with them, right? So
Can I
that's it.
just build on that point though? Because what you've talked there is about your sort of market reach, market share in terms of impact, right? But impact can also be more regionalised and contextualised. So, for example, if it's an SME, think about it being a small business within a regional community. That impact may be just as strong, but it's relative to that community. So it doesn't.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, you need to pick regional related topics.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we have perhaps mass activism and macro and micro activism.
Right. Exactly. Um, okay, and then a question from Jen saying, thinking about Hamdi's TED talk, and she's saying that she's disclosed it's one of her favourites. Same here. It feels like activism and meaning is closely related to a company's why. So, borrowing the concept from Simon Sinek, of course. Do you think companies are using this moment as an opportunity to reevaluate their why? I mean, can I have a stab at this first, Abas, if you
Please.
don't mind? So we know that some research from Stanford has come up with some sort of a 4-quadrant approach. One of those quadrants in terms of the emerging areas is this thing about social enterprise and social impact. We keep talking about this, right? And this is not just social currency because it's like this woke thing and it's a cool thing to say. It is in fact something that is a real trend that people are feeling. And we can see this manifesting is if we have the 80-20 rule, 80% of all new ventures in the startup space are within the social enterprise space. We can also see the behaviour of full-time employees sometimes being handcuffed to organisations because of the necessity to pay off, say, the mortgage, so financial security. But is there heart and mind there? Is there passion and purpose there? Probably not in some cases. And so what this speaks to is this higher order thing about seeking your passion for your fulfillment, and that's mainly within giving back, social enterprise. So that whole thing about why, so we got to look at the alignment between organisation behaviour and their staff engagement. Have you got them by the heart? You got them by the heart. This is, the commitment is there. That relationship is mature. It's established, and there's commitment. Looking at that framework earlier, and the same thing with people wanting to pursue their passion in life and giving back. So that's my sort of like a broader framework in terms of the importance of social impact and enterprise and the why being aligned. Abas.
I think you just perfectly, address this question, I believe. Yeah. So I'm with you on this.
All right, so let's move on to the spillover effects in the last 5 minutes, and let's talk about what we mean about what do we define as spillover effects here?
So the spillover effect is something we are seeing after this latest Black Lives Matter movement. That yes, it started with a fight against racism, against discrimination, but now the spillover effect is that it has gone from racism to sexism to ageism to all different types of discrimination in the society. And we see brands are called to change the name of their brands. They have iconic brand names like they had actually. Aunt Jemima was one of them that they announced that they will rename the brand, or Redskins. And there was a rugby team, I believe, in US with Redskin name that they also, I believe they changed the name. So these are the spillover effects well beyond Black Lives Matter. And this is going back to your comment and the previous question. This is the moment for brands to revisit what they have done in the past, or what they have achieved, and whether there are rooms for, revising the strategies, launching new campaigns, promising to hire new groups of employees, new talent. You know what I mean? Launching new brands and new products that symbolically tries to fight against discrimination. So that is the spillover effect, and going forward, we will see more of that. It started from Black Lives Matter, perhaps, but it won't end there.
No, indeed. Let's see if we've got time for just one more question here is how to recover from a backlash. When do you apologize and when to stay neutral or defend your values? What are the key aspects to consider recovery strategy to regain brand value?
Very good question. Perhaps the slide before this one can, to some extent, help us like explain what are the strategies. So you need to identify the source of backlash, whether that was lack of authenticity, whether that was lack of practice, low fit, or no commitment, just symbolically posting on Insta, or minor investment relative to your power and your revenue. So you need to just address that bit directly. So a key strategy to moderate the backlash is the degree of sacrifice that you make as a brand, the level of investment, and to what extent you are prepared to give up on profit. That will, to some extent, neutralizes the backlash.
Mm. And I guess there are other dimensions there as well, not just profit. If we consider the triple bottom line sort of framework, that it is about authenticity and being genuine in seeking that, that purpose. So when we look at transparency and trust behaviors there, this is about an ongoing dialogue out there. So getting back to the question of as to when to apologize, or, I think it's a personal sort of, it's a choice that people make to engage in that conversation. If there is an issue there, that I think it's always good to have a discussion about it. So open communication is always a good signal for that transparent culture within that organization, which signals trust at the end of the day. And that's an ongoing dialogue that happens all the way through. If you have a look at the behaviors of organizations who do it really well, this is what they do, is communicate openly and through multiple channels. Well, that's all we've got really time for. I see it's like bang on 5 o'clock. So we've covered quite a lot of themes today. So just to recap, 3 major things: to appease or appeal, from reacting to creating meaning, and then finally the spillover effects. So Abas has been, in the media and is regularly approached to comment on this space, and so we'll provide all this information, this slide deck for you, and some more contact details for Abas if you'd like to get in contact with him, and some more information about the course in a follow-up email to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We hope you got something out of it. Abas, thank you so much for your insights as well.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, thanks for joining us. And I hope that was a fun session for you.
Same. So I had a lot of fun. Thank you again, and have a good evening wherever you are, or a good day. Thank you.